love stuff, guys. I can't help it. Sometimes I sit here and I look at my room, and outside of the fact that it's a little messy right now, it is like the library room of my dreams when I was a kid. The library that never closes. I never have to leave it. Some people say that it stresses them out to have a lot of stuff. It does not stress me out to have a lot of stuff, as long as I have a place to put it. I am home a lot, and part of the reason I love being home is all the possibility, all of the books to read, all of the albums to listen to, all of the video games to play. I love being home, and I love my stuff. Hello friends, I'm Lydia Foxglove, and I am a fantasy author. This video is getting a tiny bit off topic. Generally, I talk about writing and world building and the creative life. Sometimes that includes the financial side of the creative life, because I feel that money transparency in the creative community, as well as being frugal, really helps with establishing yourself as a full-time creative and having creative freedom. And I did a recent video on tips for living a frugal creative life. I got some comments on that video saying that I couldn't possibly be that frugal because I was sitting in front of a huge manga collection. And that's kind of on me. I should have thought to mention the source of the manga collection. I should know better because I have watched a lot of YouTube videos on being frugal, and they usually are also minimalist. There's a whole genre that's just people sitting on the floor of a white room wearing like a white t-shirt, and it's like, why I'm so frugal. And of course there is nothing wrong with being a minimalist. There's a lot of advantages to it. Your house is probably really easy to vacuum and dust. And yes, it does save time to never have to worry about like what to do with your stuff, what to keep, etc. It's just that my personality has never been minimalist. I have always been little treasure hoarding dragon child who collects things. I was the kid that had the shell collection, the fossil collection, the coin collection, the stamp collection. Like, not only did I have a collector personality, I had like an archivist personality. I have a whole collection of teen magazines, some which were from my own teenhood that I kept because I was like, future me might want to remember what was in style and what was cool when she was a teen. But also, even back then, I would buy any teen magazine from previous decades because I wanted like an archive of what exactly was cool and what prior decades thought was important. So I have this whole teen magazine collection. Oh my gosh, one of them fell behind the bookshelf. Just magazines in general, in fact. I still have like a bunch of video game magazines from like the early to mid 90s. Like, I just can't help myself. I need to hold on to things. So I'm never going to be a minimalist. I also really like physical copies of things. I like owning things. I have quite a large reference library. I have a lot of CDs. I have a lot of records. I even have some DVDs, even though I'm not a big movie person. But, you know, like when I really like a movie, I still want to own it. So if you look at my house, you probably would not think that I am as frugal as I am. But guess how much I currently have invested in this wall of manga? I haven't crunched the numbers exactly, but it can't be more than like $2,000 at most. I have 2,500 manga here, about. I am sure that I'm less than $1 in the hole per manga volume. Maybe even less. I might even be in the black. And the reason why is because the whole time that I was buying manga, I was dealing in manga, along with the fact that manga was very cheap at the time that I was buying it. And that was partly why I started collecting it. I was thinking about how when I was younger, I dreamed of buying manga, but I couldn't afford to like collect whole series. And I was in a used bookstore, and they had the entire series of Emma by Kaoru Mori. It was one I'd always wanted to read, and I was thinking about it and saw that each volume was like $3. So the whole series was like $30. And suddenly I was like, why am I not buying manga now? My used bookstore had a whole aisle of manga, and they were priced between $3 to $5. And then they also had like a big clearance manga section where it was all like $1 or $2. And it was always $5 off a $25 purchase. And sometimes it was also like buy 3, get 1 free. And this was not the only used bookstore in my town that was like that. There was another used bookstore. They had like 4 shelves of manga and they were all like $2 to $4. So a lot of this manga was bought at prices that would make current collectors cry. And at the same time, when I bought Emma, I looked it up online when I got home and I saw that it was out of print and it was selling for more than $30. So then I realized, some of this stuff is out of print. At the time, I only had a flip phone, mind you, so I could not research things on the spot. But I spent like hours on eBay and like manga collecting communities researching what volumes were out of print and desirable and making a spreadsheet that I printed out and could carry with me every time I was buying manga for my own collection. So if I saw like a random volume of like Golgo 13, I could buy it and flip it, and then a lot of times that one flip would pay for whatever I bought for myself. So that's how I funded my manga collection. It didn't cost me very much money at all. And even now, as I'm reading the series, if I read something through and I don't love it, I sell it, so I'm still making money on it. And I'm also not buying a lot of new manga because manga's not cheap anymore. Which brings me to the general topic of being a collector and also being frugal at the same time. It is possible. I don't think that there's anything wrong with being a frugal person who also loves to collect things. But you do have to be realistic about your own brain. I mean, that's probably like my advice for everything I talk about. Be realistic about your own brain. Over the years, I've come to better understand like the science of dopamine. Nobody was really talking about dopamine until the last few years. And as soon as I heard this idea that like, oh, when you buy something, you get this dopamine and it's like a drug, I was like, oh yeah, okay, that explains a lot. Like how obvious. It's very drug-like. It's exciting to be on the hunt, find the thing and buy the thing, and then it fades very quickly and you want the next hit. And if you enjoy collecting or shopping in any way, you know this feeling. So if you want to be frugal and be a collector at the same time, you need to be aware that it is a dopamine hit and that you're not just pursuing the dopamine hit unnecessarily and too frequently and going beyond what your budget allows. I started collecting manga simply because I love manga. It inspires my storytelling. I love looking at the art, and I often end up feeling very inspired as a storyteller after I'm done with a good manga. So I feel like that's a beneficial thing as a writer and sometimes artist to have access to all of that. And the same with my music collection. I listen to it while I'm writing. There's different bands that seem to match different vibes for me. So there's like a real creative benefit to having my collections. That I don't consider to be part of the dopamine hit of buying the thing, hunting for the thing. So I don't want to lose my collection or give up on collecting things. But I do need to be very aware of the dopamine hit and make sure that I'm not overdoing it. But I'm going to give you like my personal rules for collecting stuff. I also want to note that I am 42 and I have been going to thrift stores and used bookstores and antique malls and yard sales and blah, blah, blah my entire life. Since I was a kid, my mom was into that stuff and I kept with it. So when you look at my house and it's full of stuff, you see all my cool stuff that I have, just know that it's not like I bought all this in like a handful of years. If you're 25 and you're like, oh, I want all the cool stuff she has, like, slow down. You've got 17 more years before you should expect to have as much cool stuff as I have. I feel like I sound like a jerk saying I have a lot of cool stuff, but it's only cool if you are into the same things as me. A lot of people would think that I'm just a big nerd with a hoard of crap. But anyway, I've been collecting my whole life and I'm very thoughtful about what I buy. I do purge things regularly, but I don't buy a lot of stuff just to buy it. I'm I've always been fairly thoughtful about, do I really want this thing? So I don't have a huge turnover. Okay, so here are some of the things I think about when I'm shopping. First, is this priced cheaply enough that I could resell it on eBay, and when you factor in fees and shipping, I could still break even or do better? That is a huge motivator for buying the thing at that moment, because it's priced just low enough that if I decided tomorrow, I actually don't like this thing, I could resell it and no harm, no foul, except for a little bit of time to list it on eBay. Prices of things can fluctuate, but if you've been collecting for a little while, you generally have an idea what kind of things go down in price versus what things go up in price. Like the novels I buy at Barnes & Noble, I'm not expecting to resell for anything except maybe to trade them at a used bookstore. And I also do consider like how likely I am to actually sell the thing on eBay. Like vintage clothes are a pain to sell on eBay. You really should have a dress form. You have to measure them, and there's more likelihood of a return. Whereas like a 3DS game or a box of manga, super easy to sell. That takes like 5 minutes of my time. Another question I ask myself, am I excited to use this thing? Like soon? Is this a book where I am going to move this to the top of my to be read pile? Is this video game one that I am dying to play? And yes, of course, I probably could stop buying things now and I would already be amused for the rest of my life. So clearly not everything is passing this criteria, but when you're factoring in like the price versus the excitement level, you know, if I'm going to pay a little more versus just I found a book at a thrift store for 50 cents, I don't have to be quite as excited about it. I could just sit it on the shelf, like think about it for a little while and move it on. I'd probably get 50 cents trade in at a used bookstore later, so, you know, fine. And I ask myself, is there any level of FOMO involved? I don't want to buy something because of FOMO. I only want to buy it because I love it. Sometimes with novels, I know I end up buying them, sometimes because like everybody's talking about this book. It'd be fun to read it and talk about it with people, but then I don't read it because it doesn't really sound like a book I want to read that much. So I'm trying not to do that. Even worse kind of FOMO is the kind where there's like a special edition, limited edition. Companies have really figured out that nerds will buy special edition, limited edition, Comic-Con exclusive, anything that says you can only have this now. And sometimes I'm guilty, like when they came out with the Final Fantasy Pixel Remastered, like special box set. I didn't buy it. I wasn't even really paying attention to like be ready to pre-order it the second it dropped, and then it sold out. And then I felt FOMO. Oh man, why didn't I get that? I love the old school Final Fantasies. I could have had the special edition. But also, I have those special edition, both of the Lunar games. They came out with like a special box set that had a bunch of stuff in it for the PlayStation. And I have both of those. And when I think about that, I feel all like proud. Like I have them and they've got all the extra stuff in them. But if you held a gun to my head and asked me, what is the extra stuff? What do you have? What's in that box? I don't know. I couldn't tell you what's in those boxes. So if I don't even know what I have, does it matter that I own it? Not really. It's very human to want to have nice things, and for the people, your friends or your social media followers that are within your little niche culture, to see the things you have and go, oh my gosh, you have that, wow. Like we all get a little rush of happiness when someone's like, wow, your collection is amazing. But I really, really try to resist that urge and only buy things that make me happy. And if I don't need them anymore, to just sell them, even if they're like a status item. Like I had a full set of the Basara manga, which is one of the most coveted sets of shoujo manga, but I read it and I liked it, but I didn't like it enough that I'm never going to reread it. So I sold it. And whenever I think about selling it, I never think like, I want to read that again. But sometimes I think, oh man, it would have been so cool to have that on my shelf. People would be like, wow, you have Basara. So I really try to resist that, try to let that go. I am not keeping things to impress people. If you're going to be a frugal collector, you should also be a conscientious. That's so hard to say. A conscientious collector. You really don't want to buy things just to complete the collection or to have the thing, because, it seems like a little thing to just have like an extra book, an extra video game, just because you wanted to complete your collection. But also, like, the planet's resources are still being used. Like, how many things do nerds have on their shelf? All the plastic that has been generated just for people to complete their collection. It's very sobering when you think about it. When my father-in-law died and we went through his house, we threw away multiple full dumpsters of all the boxes of all of his figures. And he had so many things that some of the things had never been opened. They weren't on display because he didn't have space. I've been to estate sales where, like, they have 500 sealed DVDs. So I also don't want to collect things just so that my estate sale, when I die, is like, wow, must see, treasure trove for collectors. So there's some things I think about when deciding what to buy. Then there's the funding of the collection as a whole. Like I said, I'm a big fan of flipping things in order to fund your collection. If you're buying a collection, you're probably kind of an expert in that thing, so you might as well start dealing in it as well. But certain categories are admittedly much harder to find cheap than others. Some things I just never find at like a price that I could flip it. Too competitive. So this is where it helps to really sit with yourself and think about all the things you're interested in, how much they matter to you, and how much you really want the thing versus you just like the thrill of the hunt. And I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong with acknowledging that the dopamine hit of shopping for things is fun and can be a nice stress reliever at times. I wouldn't use it as like an antidote for depression all the time, but there's times where, like, when my cat died and I'm like, I want to go to some thrift stores, it'll help me get my mind off it. I know this feeling is going to pass, but this will just get me out of my head for a few hours. I'll get the little rush of buying some stuff and, I'm working through my feelings. Sometimes I'm totally fine with just going shopping to get a dopamine hit and no other reason. But I try to make sure that if I'm spending a higher amount on something, I really plan to engage with the thing. Versus if I just want the thrill of shopping, I'm trying to think of things that are cheap. Like, you go to the thrift store and you're just looking at the books, and the books are at most $3. And then I have a mental list of, like, here's the kind of books I'm looking for. And they're usually something that's a little hard to find, so I might not even find one. But if I do, it's like, yeah, found one. $2. That's not like a huge risk to my budget, and I got like the excitement of finding a thing, and I might not read it, but for $2, that's not going to kill me. But when we're talking about more serious collections, I have shifted my main collecting category around over the years based on like overall trends. Bought most of this manga from 2017 to like the early stages of the pandemic, because manga was cheap, and I had this theory that the way that collecting trends work, that I was kind of like an old manga fan, and I was just hitting like some pretty good earning years. I was 35 in 2017, so I was making decent money. I had some money to spend, and I had this nostalgia for manga. But I was pretty early on, so I thought, well, when the Adult Swim generation, that's like maybe a little younger than me, when they start hitting their earnings / nostalgia years, they're going to grab all the manga and the price is going to get higher. And that seems like that kind of did happen. Manga collecting is now a much more expensive hobby than it was in 2017. Same with vinyl records. I bought a lot of vinyl records around the same time because at that point it was like $6 to get like Fleetwood Mac's Rumors, and it wasn't as cheap as it was in like the year 2000. So at first I was a little grumpy, like I should have bought more in the year 2000, but I didn't have a lot of money in the year 2000. And I thought that's still a bargain. They're not making original pressings of records from the 70s and all the like history, and people still love the music, and people are buying more vinyl record players, and I could see this trend accelerating and people buying them just out of like wanting to have the artifact and the analog sound. $6 still seemed pretty good, so I bought a ton of albums. And sure enough, I was also right about vinyl records. I don't know if I'm just really good at this trend thing, but yeah, vinyl records got way more expensive, and I don't really buy much of them anymore. I'll set aside like $100 now and then, maybe every 2 or 3 months, go to the local record store and see if he's got anything. He always does. But now I'm buying more like one $60 record that I could never find before, rather than like a whole stack. Meanwhile, what's currently a better price, CDs are still very cheap. So I've been buying a lot of CDs now. Vintage clothing, mid-century vintage clothing has actually gotten cheaper than when I was young, because when I was like in my 20s, of course, everybody was into the 50s and 60s. That was what was hot at the thrift store. And on eBay, it was more expensive. A lot of the cool girls had kind of like a rockabilly style. Now all the cool kids are dressing like 80s, 90s. And the price of the like 50s clothes is not really gone up much. Like it hasn't kept pace with inflation, in my opinion. So I've been keeping more of an eye on vintage clothing booths and things like that. So I tend to shift things around based on what seems to be kind of a deal at the moment. And if you're really just interested in like one collecting category, that maybe isn't quite as valid. But if you like a number of things, you know, you might want to shift things around, your priorities over the years based on what seems to be kind of undervalued at that particular moment. I also try, along with trying to resist the urge to like complete a collection or to buy stuff just because it would look cool on my shelf, I also try not to get too hung up on things like the condition or owning multiple copies of something. Like I have a fair amount of ex-library manga, and some people will not buy ex-library manga, or they won't buy like a set if the Tokyo Pop logo changed and you have like a later printing and they don't quite match. Like I'm not picky about that stuff. My main purpose is to read it. And if your main purpose is not to read something, I feel like it's a little weird to collect things just to have everything be like perfect. I know there's a lot of collectors like that. Obviously, there is a huge market for like graded and everything perfect. I generally just want the stuff because I'm a frugal collector, and ultimately I want to enjoy the thing, the contents, not always have to have the most perfect example that I'm usually going to be paying more for. Here's a good example. See how like trashed my copy of Pinups is? But I saw this album many times for like $20, $25, and I kept passing it up. And then one day I saw this one. It's marked 10. I think I paid $8 for it. And, you know, the cover looks terrible, but the album plays great. So to me, that's a big win. I also really enjoy the hunt. And part of the fun is trying to find the best price for something. The hunt is as exciting as the purchase. And I'm not going to buy something unless it's the right thing. It has to be a thing where I think this is the best price I'm probably ever likely to see, or this item is so unique, and if I don't buy it now, I'm never going to see it again. But also, it really fits all my boxes of like what my style is, what my vibe is. I can go to 5 thrift stores and not buy a thing if I don't see anything that fits my style. So it really helps to have a sense of what you really love and not buy things just because you want to buy something. If you're going to be frugal, you really need to cultivate discipline. And that's where it's also good to choose your shopping partner carefully, because you don't want the friend that enables you with everything that you linger your eyeball on for 5 seconds longer than usual. You don't want the friend who's always like, that looks so cute on you. Oh my gosh, you have to get it. Wow. Like, don't go shopping with a shopping addict. Go with somebody that will actually kind of check you and go, do you really need that? Or just go by yourself and be disciplined. So anyway, this is not advice for every kind of collector. Obviously, if you're not trying to be frugal, just, I guess you can go nuts. If you do have a shopping addiction and you're not disciplined, then I would not advise trying to go out and shop. I would try to get a handle on that mentally before I buy anything, if at all possible, because it's not easy. So that's my general advice for being the kind of collector I am, which is someone who does not spend a lot of the budget on my collection and also tends to make profit on my collection when I do sell it. This isn't going to work for everyone, but I just wanted to talk a little bit about how you don't necessarily have to be a minimalist to be frugal. There's a lot of resources on the science of dopamine and why we shop and why we will buy things we don't need. I really recommend studying that a little bit if you haven't already. But I can't be the only person out there who is a frugal and disciplined collector, and I just wanted to share some of my tips and advice. And if you have any other tips or advice, feel free to share them in the comments, as well as let me know what you love collecting. At least if you're like me and you just can't help yourself, you love stuff, you love junk shops of any type. And my final tip is get a job at a used bookstore or a used clothing store or a used video game store because then you get the fun of hunting for things for the store and you get the dopamine hit of seeing someone else buy them, which has helped me a lot as far as giving me an outlet that doesn't involve me actually buying the thing. Not practical for everybody, but that's another reason that I also love flipping things on eBay now and then. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you're new here and you want to stick around, usually I talk mainly about writing, world building, the creative life, and sometimes frugal and financial topics. Oh, and sometimes nerdy stuff too. So if that sounds good to you, click that subscribe button. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye!